The Zip now has a motor. We now have an outboard for the Zip. I had, bounced back and forth about what I was going to do for an outboard, whether or not I was going to go vintage or go buy brand new. And I've been looking for quite a while for a short shaft 40 horse. Drove several different times, an hour plus each direction to look at different outboards. Almost all of them turn out to be long shafts or have some, major problem. I went to go look at a 40 horse. It's about an hour drive away that turned out to be, again, a long shaft, and it was frozen. So I've wasted an incredibly large amount of time trying to find an outboard, and I finally found one. However, it's not a 40 horse. It's a 25 horse. And, I kind of had my heart set on a 40 horse for the Zip. That's what the maximum they're rated for, although people run 50s pretty regularly. So I know of another particular Zip builder, Josh Wilson, who built a beautiful Zip. There's videos on YouTube about his Zip. I knew he was running a Mercury 25 horse on his Zip, so I contacted him and I asked him, hey, what kind of performance are you getting? What do you see in your Zip? Because mine should be about the same weight as his, maybe a hair heavier. But I believe his motor is an 86 or 7. He's seeing 26 miles an hour out of a Zip with a 25 horse. So I started doing the math on that. And, most Zips that run 40 horse are seeing around 29 or 30 miles an hour. So you're really only looking at a 4 mile an hour top speed loss running a 25 versus a 40. So, thinking about it, I stumbled on this one. A guy at work had it. It was on one of his boats, and it stopped running a few years ago, and it's just been sitting ever since. So I went out and I looked at it, and I thought, well, I was able to grab the flywheel and roll it over by hand so it wasn't froze up. I could feel that it had decent compression. I could feel the compression on each cylinder. Story I got was he was out driving his boat around, and all of a sudden it dropped one of the cylinders. It lost spark on one side. And so he limped it back to the dock. And that was the end of it. Parked the motor. So, unless you are fairly mechanical or, electrically inclined, I don't recommend buying a used outboard that doesn't run. But in this particular case, again, I knew the source. I knew where it came from. And I trust this person. And I did a bunch of research on this particular engine prior to purchasing it. In the event, let's say it needed a new stator, or maybe it needed a new trigger, or perhaps it needed, a new brain switch box. Let's say I had to purchase all of that stuff. That's roughly $450 for an entire new ignition system. And because the price of the outboard was so inexpensive, I thought, what, I'm gonna take a risk on it. I didn't pull the plugs. I didn't, run a compression check on it. I just bought it. And this outboard cost me $300. It's a 97 Mercury 25E. It is electric start. It came with cables and a control box. Everything's, in pretty nice shape. It needs cleaned up. It's been sitting for a few years. There's the motor cowl. So 97 Merc 25E. So I started going through the motions, checking things out. I've spent the last few days giving myself a crash course on, late 90s Mercuries and ignition systems. So one of the first things I did was I checked, and I was only getting spark on the top cylinder. So then I pulled off this green wire and the green with the yellow stripe. These are the signal wires to the coils, and I flipped them. So what this test was going to tell me is if the spark moved to the lower cylinder, then my coils are good. So I flipped those two wires, tested it, and I did in fact get spark on the lower cylinder. So I knew the coils were good. Put the two green wires back where they came, moved to the next setup. The next spot, which would be the switch box. So an easy way to test the switch box, we've got the 2 trigger wires coming in here, brown with yellow, brown with white. So if I reverse those 2 wires and crank it over, if the spark stays on top, the switch box is bad. If the spark moves to the bottom cylinder, the switch box is good. So I did. I reversed those 2 wires, cranked it over, and we got spark on the lower hole. All right, we're getting somewhere. The switch box is good. So now the next spot is moved to the trigger, which is this little guy here. So I pulled the flywheel off, set it aside, and I was immediately stumped. I thought, what the hell? I thought there was supposed to be 2 triggers in here, 1 per cylinder. This doesn't make any sense. So then I started thinking, well, how could it spark 2 cylinders with only 1 trigger? Okay, it's got to have 2 magnets. And I came over to the flywheel, which I didn't pay any attention to. Here's one of the magnets. You can see I've scribed lines from the outside of the flywheel onto the magnet. And the other magnet was slid all the way around and stuck up beside this magnet. So it had broken its epoxy bond off the flywheel and through inertia and RPM slid over until it hit the other magnet. That was my eureka moment when I realized that. That's why we only had spark on 1 hole. It was just 1 gigantic magnet. They weren't opposed to each other. So as a test, I was able to, and I've sanded this up with 80 grit and prepped it, and I sanded all the old epoxy off the back of the magnet. But I was able to, with the old dirt rust lines, position that magnet exactly where it used to be, and that's very important. But I was able to get it, within probably, I don't know, 15 thousandths or less of a degree, by putting it right back on its old rust marks. And then I scribed it in 3 places, there, and right here. Scribed the magnet, took it back out and prepped it up. But just to test my theory, because I'm sure this is what went wrong. The magnet epoxy broke loose, it slid over, it lost spark to 1 hole. To test that theory, I stuck the magnet back to it, positioned it where it needed to be, took the flywheel over, stuck it on top of the outboard, and just cranked it over with the key, checking. Spark on the bottom hole. Pulled my spark detector, spark checker, hooked it up to the top, cranked it over, spark, rehooked it up to the bottom, spark, rehooked it up to the top, spark. So now we have spark on both holes. It was most certainly this magnet that came loose. Now, I could go buy a new flywheel. They're not terribly expensive, couple $100. But while researching a new flywheel, I saw several outboard companies or repair companies for outboards that sold what they call a flywheel repair kit or flywheel magnet repair kit. It's nothing more than a new magnet and some epoxy. That's really all they're glued on from the factory with. And my first thought when I realized that this magnet came off was JB Weld. That's the very first thing that came to mind was JB Weld. And I can almost guarantee that the epoxy that they're gluing these magnets on with in the repair kit is JB Weld. I looked up several forums, and this repair has been made countless times. It's a permanent repair. It's not like it's something that's going to fall off in a week. So tonight I sanded everything up, took all the old epoxy off the back of the magnet, sanded it up, cleaned everything with alcohol. I'm going to bring this inside the house and let it sit overnight to bring the temperature up. And then tomorrow after work, I'll spread a really thin layer of epoxy on here. I'll spread a very thin layer of epoxy on the magnet, stick it in there, position it based on my little marks. You can see there's 2, one under my thumb. So I'll line up my marks with the outside marks, and then I'll put a clamp on it and clamp it just snugly and let it sit for about 3 or 4 days just to guarantee it's good and cured. Then I can reassemble the outboard, and I'm 99.9% sure that's all that's wrong with this thing. The magnet came loose. So while I've got this all apart, I'll go ahead and scrub all this up in here and clean. But it looks like I will have a fully functional, ready to drop on the zip outboard for about $305. Very economical. Now, I may find out that maybe a 25 just isn't quite going to cut it. Maybe it's not quite going to do it. But dollars wise, you know, if I decide to go to a 40 because this one isn't quite going to do it, I can always turn around and sell this. I'll make money on the deal, and, you know, use that to invest in a bigger motor. But we'll see how the 25 does. I think we should give it a chance. So I'm very excited. Again, you know, it's got the it's got the Oregon green stuck on it here, but a nice little pressure wash. I'm going to pull the whale tail off of it for now, see how it does on the Zip. If I'm having porpoising issues or planing issues, you know, maybe I'll put the whale tail back on. I personally don't think they look bad. I'm just going to test it without it first. I would prefer to run without one, but do a little cleanup, pressure wash it real well, simple green it. The inside's very, very clean. Just has some dust on it, you know. But I think it's going to be a very good little outboard. So I'm excited. I am excited. Crash course in late 90s Merc 25E ignition systems. And on a side note, how to fix a flywheel magnet that's come loose. Making good progress. Okay, so we now have the flywheel back on the outboard. Torque to spec. I went ahead and let the JB weld that holds that magnet in there set up for 3 days. It's good and cured. It's like a rock. Tonight I made up a couple connections, just repaired some connections because it was cranking over really slow when I started. So I fixed some connections as well as some down on my batteries. These are just to test, obviously. They're not going in the boat. But I fixed some electrical connections. There was a spot up here for one of the brain wires that had rubbed on the flywheel, so I repaired that connection. Every connection that I repaired, I soldered and heat shrunk, and then I rerouted everything so it's underneath, no wires rub on anything. I pulled the carburetor, pulled the carb off, and cleaned it. It's going to need a rebuild because the little diaphragm for the primer, which I don't know if you'll be able to see. Not really. That little blue knob is the actual primer, and you know the diaphragm's leaking around that a little bit. The rest of the carb seemed okay, but I went ahead and cleaned it up, made it just beautiful, spotless inside and out, blew everything out, reassembled it, and then I spent a few hours last night cleaning out, you know, all the residual gunk and grease that was under here. It's like spotless in here now. But we got the flywheel back on. You can see, hopefully you can see, it's just absolutely spotless underneath there. And we're getting ready to test it. So I've got my spark plug tester in line for the lower cylinder. This is one that had lost spark before. So here, cameraman, come grab my camera. And just hold it right there. So I'm going to crank it over. We should be able to see spark if the fix worked. We have spark. So now I'll move this to the top one just to verify. Put this plug wire back on. Pull the top one off. Come on, baby. Come on. There she goes. Plug the little tester on. And we'll crank it over again. We got spark on this hole. The fix worked. We got to run an outboard. All right. So we got spark on both holes now. So the next thing to do is I'll get the pull start assembly bolted back up on here. We'll get some mixed fuel for it and try to start it up. Making fantastic progress. Well, we got our seats back. Here it is under the blue LEDs. I slipped the ceilings of the side panels in just for this quick video here, just to kind of give it an overall look. But so now we'll turn on the lights and check it out. So here they are. The seats are back. Just beautiful. Flawless, flawless, beautiful. Looks really nice. And it's exactly what I wanted. A little swoop, 2-inch zone pleats. You kind of 45 the bottom. They fit fantastic. I mean, just snug on each side of the armrest. And for the record, I left a 1/2-inch gap. My plywood that the base is made out of, I left a 1/2-inch gap on each side, and they fit snug. So when you're making these, you know, seat bases, seat bottoms, and parts, leave lots and lots of clearance room, especially if you're going between something. for instance, you know, armrest to armrest, leave at least a 1/2 inch gap. I mean, a 1/2 inch gap, they're snug. And I put a 1/2 inch gap in there thinking that that was going to be more than enough, and it's actually snug. I'm glad I didn't go any thinner. So then we've got the back of the front seat here, and this is the only seat part where I had him cover the back side because it's visible. If you look in, you know, behind the box, you'll see this side of the seat. So I had him cover the back of that. The seat bottom, this seat bottom, and the rear seat back is still raw. You can see the wood behind it. So anyhow, turned out frickin' beautiful. Fit flawlessly. Looks so nice in here. What a month. Got the interior and the outboard. Man, things are going great. If this outboard runs, I'm in freaking heaven. Oh, it's so pretty. So pretty. Making fan-damn-tastic progress. What I got going on here is we've got the outboard outside. I have a fresh fuel in this can along with brand new mix oil. I ran some fuel through the hose into an empty container just because this is the old hose. I don't know what's inside it and I wanted it to be clean. So what we're going to do is attempt to start this up for the first time in 4+ years. So let's give it a try. I've got my batteries out here, connected, fully charged. So, okay, fuel line's on. So we'll go ahead and prime this guy, pump it up. Okay, so the fuel ball is good and hard. We should have fuel. So the next thing I'm going to do is, this is our choke knob. Half a pull's choke, but if you pull it a full time, that's a prime. So we're going to prime it about 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going back to choke. I'm going to turn this all the way to the right. That's going to be higher idle. Let's try to fire it up. Let's see what happens. Come on. It's trying. It is trying. Okay. Prime it a little bit more. So we'll give it throttle down here. It's alive. 4+ years. I'm looking for a pee stream. I want to see water come peeing out of this thing real soon. And I don't see any yet. There we're getting some, just a little bit. Well, it fired. Let's try bringing the throttle up some. Doesn't like that. I'll check the fuel again, make sure we got good pressure up there, okay? Anyhow, it runs. I'm gonna play with it. We'll see what we can make happen. All right, we're peeing good water. That's a good sign. Now I just got to work on that idle. So I played with the idle stop, the low RPM idle screw, mechanical screw for the throttle linkage, because whenever I'd shut this off, it would actually go, it would idle too low and die. So I adjusted that. Motor's up to temp. I'm going to show you how easy this thing starts. So key on, should be one pull. And there it is. So with it running, we'll go ahead and drop it into forward. So there's forward, at an idle, it doesn't die. Back to neutral, now we'll go into reverse. So there's neutral again, we'll go back into forward. Doesn't die again, so that's about the right idle. And now I can run the throttle here. And it'll return right back down to an idle again. A nice, reasonable idle. Now, I am running it a little bit rich right now just because it's the first time it's fired up in over 4 months, or I'm sorry, 4 years. So that's the excess smoke that you're seeing. A little rich on the oil mix and the fuel, but pretty good running motor. So this is what's left of the old tilt tube out of the Merc 25E outboard. The tilt tube had frozen. It was stuck, and surprisingly it was stuck in this half of the bracket. I still have to remove this bracket and paint it. But anyhow, I picked up a tilt tube from my local outboard supply store. It was like $24. So anyhow, I could not get this thing to tilt. I mean, could not at all. It was stuck. When I finally did get it to tilt, the tilt tube was pivoting inside of the brackets instead of the bracket on the tube. And it took everything I had to tilt this motor, and you could just let go and it would stay stuck out there. That's how tight, how stuck it was. And that was a real SOB to get out. It took me 4 hours of, I mean, you can see I had to cut the old tube into multiple pieces to get it out. And lots of heat and lots of light oil and letting it soak for days and days. Lots of beating with punches. Anyhow, so that's what I was working on. I got the tilt tube replaced. It now tilts like a dream. It's beautiful, just like it should be. But that's just one of the little things that was on the list to do to this outboard, because that's a feature, although the previous owner didn't use, I will use when trailering my Zip. So making good progress. So now that we've determined that the outboard runs, and runs pretty well, I went ahead and bought all of the just normal kind of tune-uppy stuff, or preventative maintenance things. For instance, we have a new impeller and the new little washers for the impeller, the water pump base gasket, water pump cover O-ring, just to change the impeller. That's something you should do fairly regularly. And because we don't know the condition, although it does pee water, we don't know the condition of it. It's just good practice to replace that. We also bought the carburetor rebuild kit. There's the little diaphragm that's leaking on the carburetor at the moment. And this is a starter solenoid. You know, earlier in the video when I was attempting to fire this thing up for the first time, every now and then you'd turn the key and it would just click and you'd get no crank from the starter. And after just a few short seconds of diagnosing with a test light, start solenoid's bad. So that'll cure that issue. So that's what we're doing today. We're putting in tune-uppy parts, preventative maintenance, and reliability parts. Making good progress. Well, it may not look like it, but that's $150 worth of parts. Impeller base gasket, impeller housing O-ring, 2 little neoprene washers for the impeller, starter solenoid, and the carb rebuild kit. $150. But got all that done today. one of the last things is to replace the lower unit oil. But I've got it out here on the stand. We've got fuel hooked up. And we'll just bump the key real quick. And there it is. Just about ready to drop on the zip. Lower unit oil change, and I think that's about it. Making good progress. So what I was working on today was mounting the Mercury controls in the boat. And I've got them all mounted. That's where they're going to live. Because I want to keep the cables as hidden as possible, I drilled a hole, that's an 1 3/8 hole, down through my armrest, and then I beveled it at about the same angle that the cables are running through it. Beveled the bottom of the right side and the top of the left side, so those cables, there's not much of a S-curve through those. But I've got the cables that run down underneath my armrest, and then they come out right back here behind the boat, behind the rear seat. So right here is my main plug for the wiring harness that plugs into the outboard, and then right here is my forward, reverse, and throttle cables. So everything dumps right in here. They're plenty long enough, they'll be just right. But we'll come up here. There's a look at the bracket that I made that the controls screw to. So 3 screws hold it to it, 4 screws hold it down. It's not epoxied, the joint isn't epoxied or anything like that, but just the right clearance. It doesn't interfere with the steering wheel, it doesn't interfere with the radio, it doesn't interfere with the key. I can still get to reverse and reach the key easily down here. So, yeah, things are, there it is. Back to neutral, reverse. So everything just works the way it should. And I'm pretty happy with the cables. You can see how I've ovaled this hole. I drilled straight down, and then I started sanding on an angle. I guess drilled straight down, sanding on an angle, and that kind of ovaled that hole. But it made it, instead of the cables having to make a hard 90 and hard 90, they just make a real gentle S-curve underneath it. So the control cables, that's all you'll see of them. And I can live with that. I'm pretty happy with that. So I put the seat in here and sat in it when I was positioning everything to make sure it was going to be comfortable. And it is. Making good progress. All right, it's officially April 1st, 2017, April Fool's Day. For the month of March 2017, we went up 25.25 hours. So good hours in March. We went up $543.18, and that was all in outboard. The purchase price of the outboard, as well as, you know, tune-up parts and things like that for it. So shy of changing the lower unit oil, you know, we'll be in this outboard under $600, and that's, you know, ready to drop on the Zip outboard with a full tune-up, you know, and all the preventative maintenance that should be done on a used outboard. So under $600, I can live with that. That's a fine deal. All of our 25.25 went into mechanical, all on the outboard this month. So 33, that brings our mechanical up to 33.25 hours. So 25.25 hours, that brings us up to $625.25 because we crested 600 the previous month, and our $543.18 brings us up to $8,103.29 invested. So again, we've another milestone. There goes another 1,000. I heard the witty acronym for BOAT is bust out another 1,000. I'm gonna say that's fairly accurate right now. That last 1,000 went quick. Let's see where we're at. So we got the outboard pushed over and out of the way for now. One of the things I did was paint our little steer connection where the steer rod will connect to. That was all rusty and looked like shit, so we got that painted up. I also pulled the prop, painted the prop, and bought a new nut for the prop. It's a poly nut, and after I pulled it off, I just wasn't satisfied with the threads in there. Going forward, you'd probably never notice, but if it's stripped out when you're going in reverse, you'd notice real quick because your prop would fall off. And it's like a $2 nut, so I went ahead and bought a new nut for it. So really the only thing that's left on the outboard is to change the lower unit oil and give it a good bath, and I've just been waiting for decent weather to go outside and do that. But it's sitting there just about just about ready to drop on the Zip. We've got our controls back out of the boat and sitting here. The cable is up in the rafters. So we've got the mount for the controls right here. You can see the epoxy line on it. It's cured up now, but we got that glued. I need to encapsulate that. And then we'll come over to the boat, the Zip. And there's a good look at that ovaled hole now where the cables pass through. And here's the 4 mounting holes where that bracket bolts down. So I've got that back out. The seats are, of course, back out and inside the house where they're safe. And making fantastic progress. That's where we're at. Thank you for watching. Please rate and comment. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And we'll catch you on the next update of building the Zip.